The movie starts in Jefferson Middle School of California in 1965, where the students are attending in English class. The teacher, Mr. Stephen Simon, pairs a student named Andrew Andy Nickel with the school's most infamous outcast STLY Big G minors for an end of term assignment project. Sporting bushy orange hair, a head too big for his lean and tall body, and ears too huge for his head. Stanley has been the subject of ridicule since grade school, when Andy learns that he's been paired up with the social pariah. He tries to talk with his teacher, Mr. Simon. He believes that Stanley, who is the second topper of the school, doesn't make a good match with someone like himself. However, the teacher encourages Andy to coordinate with Stanley and complete the assignment within the deadline. During lunch hour, one of the school's bullies, Ricky Brown, squirts Stanley with a water pistol, making the latter look like he wet his pants. The rest of the kids make fun of the poor guy while Andy watches him helplessly from afar. Andy later steps into the geek corner, the place where nerds hang out and study. He mentions that he cannot go back once he has set foot in this corner. He then approaches Stanley and makes a plan to sit together for the project. The ginger boy is aware that the whole school is afraid of hanging out with him, fearing that they would also be targeted by the bullies. Therefore, he tells Andy that he will complete the assignment by himself and turn it in, but the latter insists they work together because Mr. Simon will probably find out if they try to trick him. The two boys then agree to work together on the project. Once back at home, Andy tells his mother about the project. He wonders why God made Stanley the way he is, due to which he has become the target of most bullies at school. Mom cleverly replies that perhaps God did not see any fault in Stanley. The fault lies in the people who treat him poorly. The following day, Andy sees his crush Mary Clear on the way to school. She is the girl of his dreams, but he's too scared to approach her. He also learns that Mr. Simon recently won a car in a newspaper contest. He was asked to find a solution to world peace using 25 words or less. Mr. Simon had used just 4 words to bag the car. That is, human dignity plus compassion equals peace. In the hallways, one of the bullies named Jason Friel bumps into Stanley's friend Karen. She is also one of the outcasts of the school. Jason freaks out and starts screaming, believing that she transmitted an imaginary disease to him. Following this, he runs off to a friend, asking for advice on getting rid of the disease. The latter recommends him to chant an incantation. From this, the C's came with this. The C's shall remain. The only catch is that he has to say this in front of Karen herself. Heeding the advice, Jason immediately returns to the school's hallways and confronts Karen. He recites the incantation and whips the poor girl with his jacket. This causes her immense pain and she shouts at the top of her lungs. However, no one comes to her aid. Later, Mr. Simon learns about the incident, which makes him very angry. It turns out Karen sustained several on her body due to Jason's jacket zipper. As a result, the bully is suspended for a couple of days. Cut to the next scene. Andy rides his bicycle and drops newspapers in his neighborhood. As part-time work, he goes by Mary's house and pretends to have dropped the papers in the backyard instead of the porch so that he can sneak up on his long-term crush. Just then, Mary and her father show up at the door, prompting Andy to awkwardly apologize for the deed and leave. Andy also volunteers at the school's office, where he learns that Stanley has signed up for the upcoming talent show. Apparently, he is singing a song in front of the whole school when Morgan, Stanley's best friend, learns About this, he encourages Stanley to back out for the sake of his own good, that is. He could be the object of laughter once again. However, the big boy is willing to do what he desires, because he knows very well that no matter what he does, the bullies will eventually come after him. Later, during lunch hour, Mary's best friend approaches Andy and surprisingly reveals that Mary likes him. Andy is obviously happy, but he's unsure why she likes him. As the project work goes on, Andy and Stanley form a close bond. One day Jason returns from his suspension and overhears the school's rumormonger claiming that Mr. Simon is homosexual. This is massive news, as being anything other than straight in this age is considered a crime. Jason soon spreads the news to his parents, which enrages them. They believe that Mr. Simon should leave his job ASAP. In the next scene, Dad goes to the school principal to ask if the rumor is true. The principal believes it's just a made-up lie to defame Mr. Simon. She even notes that Mr. Simon has been married and then widowed for years. In response, Jason's father mentions that homosexuals often get married to the opposite gender in order to cover their tracks. He also threatens to tell the whole community or the papers about the rumor, which he takes as a fact. Before leaving, he gives the school principal 48 hours to investigate and find out the truth. Following this, the principal, who claims to have much respect for Mr. Simon, confronts him about the ongoing gossip. The teacher says that being a homosexual should not change his job. Mr. Simon does not confirm nor deny that he's a homosexual UAL, but he refuses to compromise who or what he is for the likes of Jason Friel or his parents. In the meantime, Andy is planning to take Mary to a spot named Steady, where teens usually make out. He also gets an ID bracelet for her as a gift. Unfortunately, the school's bully and Mary's ex-boyfriend Ricky Brown catches wind of this and gets enraged. He confronts Andy and threatens to kill him if he goes anywhere near Mary. He even goes so far as to punch him in the stomach, but before he can cause any more damage, Stanley arrives at the scene and stands up for his friend. Ricky finally leaves after Andy promises to stay away from Mary. However, he forgets about his truth as soon as he sees the girl of his dreams. He later asks Mary if she wants to go steady, giving her the ID bracelet. She gladly accepts his proposal and tells him to meet her after school at 3 o'clock that afternoon. Andy fails to concentrate on his studies as he tries to remember all the great kissing scenes he has watched in movies. Next, he spends the whole 6th period PE class trying desperately not to sweat for Mary's sake. Finally, when it's time, Andy musters his courage and goes to meet her. Ricky also shows up and tries to beat him up, but Mary intervenes in the nick of time. She orders him to leave and even threatens to tell his parents about his bullying antics. Hearing this, the latter reluctantly backs down, but he warns Andy that they have unsettled affairs. Following the incident, Andy slowly moves towards Mary, hoping that he can kiss her. But unfortunately, she has to leave because her bus is waiting for her. They now plan to meet after the talent show tonight. The scene then cuts to the talent show where the kids are performing on stage. Andy approaches Stanley, who is sitting alone on the rooftop. He apologizes to him for not standing up for him when Ricky had squirted water on him that one time. The Big G promptly forgives him and asks whether his best friend Morgan showed up at the show. Andy mentions that he didn't see the guy today. This makes Stanley a bit upset, but regardless, he tries to muster the courage to perform today at the show. Andy realizes that Morgan hasn't actually shown up, therefore he bikes over to his house to ask him to go. Norman initially refuses to attend because he doesn't want to see the bullies laugh at Stanley when he performs on the stage. However, when Andy persistently insists, he agrees. Finally, when it's time for Stanley to perform, Ricky has a tomato in his hand which he plans to throw at him. Andy notices this and advises him against it, but the bully is resolute in his decision. With no options left and enraged, Andy kicks Ricky, causing him to scream in anguish. Mr. Simon watches this go down, but he surprisingly doesn't scold the culprit. He instead congratulates Andy for finally standing up to the bully. He then announces to the audience that Ricky has a case of bowel movements, so he needs to be rushed out. After all is set, Stanley begins to sing his original song. He tries to communicate the fact that one should not stop dreaming even under painful circumstances. He also declares that he is no longer intimidated by the bullies. As he concludes his song, the audience goes crazy, and they give him a standing ovation. Soon after the show, Andy rushes out to meet his awaiting date. This time he is more confident, having stood up against Ricky the bully. He anxiously asks Mary if he can kiss her, to which she gladly accepts, but Andy, who has never made out with a girl before, only manages to kiss her on the cheeks. Fortunately, Mary figures it out, and Desid decides to teach him. The two then engage in a romantic make-out session. Fast forward to the last day of summer break. Mr. Simon sadly announces to the class that he is moving to Florida. He claims that his time at this school were the best days of his life. The students are shattered by the news, but they have no choice but to support him. As for Andy and Mary's relationship, they've been together for 5 whole weeks. Before dismissing the class, Mr. Simon hands over to Andy and Stanley their assignment project. He mentions that he's very proud to have students like them. Andy tries to stop him from leaving the school, but Mr. Simon's mind is set. The following day, Andy goes over to Mr. Simon's house to have one last conversation with him. He's curious as to why Mr. Simon assigned him with Stanley in the first place. In response, the teacher says that life is about timing, opportunities and choices. It was an opportunity at the right time for a young man like Andy to make the right choice. In the final scene,